Gentlemen, ever since plant pathology became a discipline and kind of a media favorite, the idea that plants have feelings too and ouch and scream when they're cut, people have been troubling vegetarians and vegan advocates with the idea that eating plants is also uncompassionate. I'm sure you all have met this and heard about it. Plant pathology may or may not be a legitimate study, but do you get those questions, and how do you respond when people say plants have feelings too? If you're eating plants, you're equally uncompassionate.
Well, since I'm very much into feelings,
perfect guy to answer that.
Since we're kind of off the clock now, sort of unofficial time, then I'll risk offending some people. Plants don't have feelings, not to the best of our knowledge. Feelings are the purview of animal life, and that's because animals need to move. They need to continually reposition themselves in the environment. In order to do that, they need neurons. Neurons are connected to, they come from, you have your brain. Your brain tries to organize your behavior, and in doing so, the entire brain is trying to set priorities for what your next movement is to help your survival or reproductive success. Then what happens is, that organization quickly prioritizes everything moment by moment, nanosecond by nanosecond, and then feeds that data to the motor strip. The motor strip in the brain then sends impulses down the motor neurons to your muscles, and then this organism moves. And that's how it works. And so plants don't have that. They don't have neurons. They are not doing what animals are doing, which is taking in sensory information from the environment, usually through multiple channels. In the case of human beings, we're taking it through at least 5 channels, and doing that, figuring out what the best way is to move, and then moving. So when you are chomping on your sprouts, you can relax, because even though they are a living thing, they are not experiencing any pain to the very best knowledge of modern science. That's what we know.
Oh, I was going to go.
Questions as brief as possible, and the answers as long as possible.
Well, my quick question was, I was researching I'm on mic, that I put together some data to show that as countries increase their dairy and cheese intake around the world, breast cancer and prostate cancer go up accordingly. And I put a nice graph together to show a good correlation between dairy intake and dairy fat intake and prostate and breast cancer. And in the research, I pulled a study by the dairy industry. I was wondering if you saw this study, that they showed that, I think it was in Norway or Sweden, that the people who had the most dairy product intake had the least breast cancer, which contradicts all the data from this country. The fact that I followed the dairy intake, the cheese and butter and whole milk intake for the last 100 years in this country, showing it went up, from like 4 pounds a person per year to 400 pounds a person a year. It's just like completely skyrocketed, which corresponds with increasing cancer. So I wonder if you saw this study by the dairy industry and how they managed to to show that in a study that contradicts all the other studies.
When most likely, most likely this was a study, just a very isolated region, and you have to look at international studies to really see these kinds of differences, because people in a single country eat so similar. They all eat one form of garbage or another. It's really hard to find differences. You have to look at international studies like you did to really see the differences, to point them out. And money will buy almost anything. Scientists are clever. They'll figure the proper design to show the results. And that's the unfortunate thing. It used to not be that way. Used to not be that heavy influence of industry on our research, but now I can't trust anything. I honestly can't. I have to look at the supporter. I have to look at the data, and then I have to ask myself, is it true? Because I know what the truth is. I've been around a long time. I know what the truth is. People are supposed to look, feel, and function well for 80 to 90 years of good life. And we're not supposed to do that with drugs, and there should be a good diet, and I believe that diet is a plant-based diet. If the research contradicts that, I have to figure out why. There is a reason. They've done something to get around that basic truth.
You got to start look at that study. Yeah.
Can you tell me what are the advantages or disadvantages of the raw vegan diet?
Okay.
I wrote a little thing on that. Again, it's in one of the newsletters. A raw diet, I think, is an improvement over the American diet. No question about it. This, of course, is not one of these things that's going to make me popular, but to me, a raw diet is basically a diet of fat and sugar. Because what you're eating are nuts and seeds and avocados and olives, and you're eating fruit and fruit juice and other simple sugars, honey, so on, molasses, whatever you happen to prefer. It's a diet of fat and sugar. And as a consequence, I don't think you attain the best kind of health you could have. And I find it quite unsatisfying. I went to a restaurant, the name, as some of you know, is Roxanne's, up in San Francisco, little north of the bridge. And people took me there. I really wouldn't spend that kind of money myself. It was about $80 a plate. And the portions, because they had to keep a relatively reasonable calorie content, I do not exaggerate. The main entree was no bigger than this. It was about the size of 4 postage stamps. And my host asked me what I thought about the meal. And I kind of grinned at him. I said, you know, that there's about enough food there to get me to Taco Bell. I was just kidding.
Thank you for this weekend. It was really brilliant. This is the 3rd year that I've come here to the VegSource conference and have always loved it and wouldn't miss it for the world. Thank you, Sabrina and Jeff and the panelists. In John Robbins' Diet for a New America, he talks about protein and indicates that rat studies actually misinformed us of what human consumption of protein should be, that the early estimates of protein consumption were way overestimated as a result of rat studies. And I know that the wealth of information that all of you bring comes from epidemiological and clinical studies. So I'm always fascinated when I come to conferences such as this that there are discussions and references to animal-based studies, which we know are terribly cruel, and take an animal out of his or her natural environment, put them in unnatural environments, and there are serious ethical considerations. I would like to hear from you what you think the relevance of animal studies are, and given that there have been clear cases in our history where animal studies have led us astray, is there relevance for animal studies?
And I'd like to hear just a brief statement from each of you on that, if we could, starting with Dr. Lisle.
I'm not sure I'm mic'd. Well, I think your points are well made, and I think that we do need to be careful in what it is that we're doing, the extrapolations that we make. This is about how well any given research study can be applied to, if it's in human populations, does one population apply to another? And certainly when we cross species, we have to be careful about any inferences that we're making, and we have to realize that the research that is ever done on animal studies is suggestive and can lead to hypotheses, but cannot be seen as conclusive. The issue about the animal rights with respect to this, I think, is a good question. I think it's one that needs to be considered, and all research investigators need to be thoughtful about this. I do, however, believe, it's my personal opinion at this moment in time, that there are things that we need to understand about how health works, that it may be useful for human life to use animal experiments. I think that they're probably overused, and I think probably a lot of things that are being done don't need to be done. They're down blind alleys. But I do think that it is still worth considering in science, but I am open to listening to the concerns of animal rights activists.
Is this on?
Fuhrman?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I should probably make a comment, because I'm the one that basically made a leading part of my story involving the use of animal experiments. I think this question, I think it's important to consider the animal rights arguments. I certainly have learned a lot listening to these arguments. I support a lot of those views, particularly when it comes to questions concerning the way animals are treated on farms. I was raised on a farm, and in fact, I live in a farming community, and I jog past these sort of factory farms, and I find it really repulsive to see what's happening today compared to what it has been in the past. On the other hand, I think this question, though, has a larger context, and I've been faced with this dilemma myself. Namely, the story that I have told here, for example, is a true story involving my own work and the way that my own mind sort of evolved over time. I mean, I came out of an animal agriculture. I used experimental animals in the early part of my career, before the time, in fact, when this kind of issue was not really very much discussed. And we learned a lot, and in particular, the kind of things that I learned, and I would argue, in fact, a lot of the information we do have in biology has come from animal experiments and is of value in the past, at least. Namely, one of the issues concerning the validity of scientific data has to do with so-called biological plausibility. Biological plausibility has to do with the way things work. Just simply looking at an observation and a correlation and comparing this with that is not terribly convincing to a lot of people. If we know how something works, it really means a lot. And I must point out that we're all animals. And whereas there are differences between species, obviously between rodents and people in terms of quantitative differences and requirements and that kind of thing to some extent, as far as qualitative differences are concerned, we're all basically very, very similar. So I don't buy the argument that the kind of information that we get from experimental animals has no relevance, because in fact it's very similar to all the rest of us. As I say, we're all animals. I have been asked, in fact, by some people not to talk about the experimental animal work. And actually, I take some offense to that, because that's the way I learned. And I'm not using experimental animals now, of course, but nonetheless, I learned it that way. And I really find it ironic that one of the biggest lessons I learned as I went through my career was that, of all things, in those experiments, I learned that animal protein was a big problem. And that started out with experimental animals, really. And so if I find that I cannot talk about this past work, if I'm not allowed to talk about this past work, I find that somewhat lacking in integrity. Because if I rely only on the human studies and the observations to try to make my point, I really can't sell the story nearly as well as I think as being able to use experimental animals, at least talk about it in the past. Now, I will totally agree that we need to do better as far as using experimental animals are concerned. And I also should point out that during the last 30 to 40 years that I've been around laboratories, these days, experimental animals are used really quite differently than what they were years ago. There's a lot of improvement. We still got a long ways to go. And one of the biggest problems that we have in experimental animal research has to do with the testing of chemicals for potential cancer-causing properties. That's a big program. I don't know what the cost is these days, but I think the government is spending somewhere around $600 to $700 million a year, sort of routinely testing chemicals on animals to see if they cause cancer. And one of the things, again, that we learned in our research is that, quite frankly, these chemicals, of which there are 70, 80, 90,000 or so that are introduced into our environment, we've only tested about 2,000 or 3,000 of them so far over the last 30 years. And we got a long ways to go. And my argument, and in fact I've published on this, we don't need to do those kind of studies. I've gone to that particular program. I've told them we don't need to do those kind of studies. But quite frankly, I can't get any place because 75% of the experimental pathologists in this country are employed in order to interpret experimental animal research for the testing of chemical carcinogens. So I think we just need to think about this issue in a larger context. I totally appreciate the sensitivity of the question, the importance of trying to keep this in context, but at the same time, we can't sort of draw blinders around and say, we never did that, we learned nothing from it, because that's simply wrong.
Would any of the rest of you care to comment?
Pardon?
Dr. McDougall?
Yeah, I leave this to my politically correct friend, Doug Lisle.
Okay, next question.
My question is, a lot of the vegan diet books and a lot of books on vegan nutrition, they talk about soybeans and flax as being great sources of vegetarian protein and oils. I'd like to get comments on why there's no mention about hemp seed, which is probably one of the most nutritious foods on the planet. And if any of you are interested in doing studies and putting that in your future books, it's a great source of nutrition for vegans.
A statement rather than a question. That was good.
Do we have any merry hempsters up on the stage?
We are fair to all nuts and seeds. Equal rights to all nuts and seeds. And I'll keep that in mind to put hemp with, as well. Sorry for that oversight.
I have a question for any or just one of the doctors regarding osteoarthritis. I've heard a lot of talk about rheumatoid arthritis being treated with the vegan diet. I'm wondering, as far as osteoarthritis, is there anything you guys can suggest to reverse or halt the progression of that, being that it's so common? There are probably 40, 50 million people that have it.
I do take care of a lot of arthritis of many kinds. And osteoarthritis you generally talk about in terms of wear and tear, but it's not all or nothing. There's a spectrum there. And people who have osteoarthritis have a component of inflammatory arthritis, in other words, a hot part of their disease. And so you just never know who's going to respond with a dietary change. If I had to give you a guess, I would say half the people who eat well, change their life, get dramatic benefits from that kind of arthritis also. So it's always worth a trial. Certainly any doctor you see, if you have osteoarthritis in your hips, knees, or ankles, they're going to tell you to lose weight. That's an important component of it. And there's also an inflammatory component that can be quieted down with a good diet. But it's just not like taking care of rheumatoid or lupus or psoriatic. I mean, these are just so much fun to treat because these people are suffering, they're crippled, and within a matter of just a few days, their whole life is different.
Hi, I was curious to know if there have been any studies done on cultures that consume insects as a significant portion of their diet.
Insects.
What about bug eaters?
We'd love to know what are there studies on cultures that consume insects. Can't help you.
I guess they stumped us there.
Insects in New Jersey?
I just want to know if that's covered under animal rights. Like mosquitoes.
It's supposed to be stump the doctors.
I think you'll have an easier time with this question.
I was wondering about the saturated fat and cholesterol content of insects.
I've taken in all the presentations and have noticed that alcohol has been not mentioned, I think, directly. Given that some public health officials feel that if you don't drink, you're at risk, I wonder what opinions you might have, and also if you would tell us whether you do drink alcohol as well.
And if so, who's buying?
Wine and beer are plant extracts. This is, a plant-based diet as far as I'm concerned.
Wine and beer.
Certainly I could compare records with any of you, but at the present time I do not drink. I haven't for several years. But I considered that once part of my vegetarian diet. And there are many people out here who are what are known as vegetarian winos. And I think you really have to take into consideration what you're doing in terms of better health. It is a serious burden on your body. So I get into the position quite often that you're talking about, and that is that responsible doctors are supposed to recommend alcohol because it reduces the risk of heart disease and who knows what else. But as a real practicing doctor, as any of these other doctors can tell you, the harm it causes is astronomical. In terms of auto accidents, in terms of spousal abuse, it should never, ever be mixed up with health.
Just one additional thing. The last time I looked, there have been 6 studies so far showing a relationship between beer drinking and colon cancer. Something that really, to my knowledge, has not been discussed very much.
When I do counsel patients, I do not, I don't restrict them from having alcohol, but I just never would push alcohol for arrest and reversal of coronary disease. We've gone through that today. We know how to do that with the proper nutrition and the proper diet. But if a patient says, can they have a beer if they want to have one, they can. But we're not pushing that to have it be a part of the disease, to be a part of the treatment of the disease. I think what John is referring to is when you read in a number of publications how alcohol seems to be beneficial, it may be if you're eating a horribly toxic American diet, that there is some data that suggests that those people who are having a couple of drinks a night may be helped by that. But why isn't it better to get rid of the alcohol and give them a decent diet? And this is I think to me that's the logical approach.
That's what I was going to say also, that first of all, not only have I not ever had any alcohol, I've never even had a cup of coffee in my life either. And that's true. Makes me kind of strange. But anyway.
You just don't have any experience. I've been there and back.
But I answer the same question when a person says, should they take aspirin? The same thing. I said, if you're at a high risk of heart attack and you're eating in the if you're taking your life into your hands with every mouthful of food you eat, then increasing your risk of having a GI bleed or having colon cancer or having some other harm done to your body with aspirin may be worth the risk because it may interfere with platelet clotting. But certainly we all recognize it's much better not to put ourselves with risk with those dangerous foods and then not to have to use other things to counter that risk that may also put us at other dangers.
Well, I'd like to talk about the aspirin for a minute. I am not a great fan of aspirin. Almost all the patients that I'm asked to counsel or come to me have coronary disease are on aspirin, and I'll not stop it right away, but once they get stabilized and we know that their cholesterol is in that range and they're safe and they've stabilized their plaque and that's healed. Because all my best understanding for the aspirin is that, remember the slide I showed where the plaque ruptures and then you start this cascade of clotting, and the whole point of the aspirin is so that when you rupture your plaque, you're going to delay the clot enough so you get to the hospital soon enough for them to begin treatment and try to save you. But once somebody has got their plaque stabilized, then why do you want to give them a drug which has the potential for causing a cerebral hemorrhage?
The data on aspirin use shows that overall it does not increase mortality, that just as many people are hurt by it that are helped by it. So it's a risky item, and so we're always juggling in medicine one risk against another, which doesn't have to be that way.
I've been told that one needs vitamin and mineral supplementation because most of the ground that our fruits and vegetables come from are depleted of the nutrients. Is that an accurate statement?
I'd really like to address that. I wrote a large article in my last newsletter on this, and I can't tell you the amount of money that I've lost over my career because I would not support supplements. I can't support supplements. I think they do more harm than good in general. Fortunately, the harm is small. The good is relatively non-existent. There are some exceptions, and if you read the article that I wrote in the August 2003 newsletter on my website, you'll find out about that. There have been more and more studies, and we've been talking about some of these. In fact, Colin will talk to you about one of them in just a minute, that show the problem with these supplements, whether they be mineral or vitamin supplements, is they create serious imbalances. When you take the vitamins and minerals in their original packages, which are starches, vegetables, and fruits, they're in proper balances with other vitamins and minerals, with phytates and fibers and proteins, and an environment that's been developed over tens of millions of years. Now what happens is you take an isolated nutrient out, say vitamin C or iron or zinc or something, and you concentrate it in a pill. Now you give it back to the person, and you've created serious imbalances in the body, which lead to higher cholesterol, which lead to higher bad cholesterol, lower good cholesterol, more artery closure. In elderly people taking vitamin E, for example, they get more serious respiratory infections and other problems. It's a bad thing to do. It's a very profitable thing to do, but it's not a healthy thing to do. There are some exceptions, and I don't really want to take the time to go into them, except for this group, and that is vitamin B12, which is one thing I've recommended for 30 years and still do. But besides that, get your fruits and vegetables from their natural packages and just throw that garbage off your bathroom shelves. It's doing you no good and a lot of harm.
Well, the other issue is it's just not true that the food doesn't have vitamins and minerals in it. because most of our produce comes from some of the richest soils in the world here in California, and we still test the food in the marketplace, or the government does, and it's not depleted in minerals, and colloidal minerals, and all the multi-level marketing and the other vitamin, trying to get you to drink these mineral products to say that the food is depleted is essentially a marketing ploy. And so it's just not true that our diet is deficient in minerals. Just keep that in mind. It's not that natural food is not deficient in minerals. It's that the diets the Americans are eating are deficient because they're not eating the mineral-rich food.
As John just referred to just a moment ago, it just so happens I have two papers in front of me that just came out here just very short, about a month or so ago, where there was an attempt to review all the studies, in fact, that have been done on vitamins A, C, E with respect to cancer and cardiovascular disease. And this is really a very substantial review. It is a very large number of studies. There's been hundreds of millions of dollars incidentally spent in the scientific community to see if, in fact, these things really work. And the conclusions are really quite devastating. And in fact, as a result of this review, there was a front page article in the New York Times Science section about 2 months ago by Marion Burroughs calling attention to this, that the entire effort to try to sell supplements as a means of accomplishing nutrition in this country has largely failed. And there, I can read a couple of statements here. I had them selected out quickly. Randomized controlled trials of specific supplements, however, have failed to demonstrate a consistent or significant effect of any single vitamin or combination of vitamins on incidence of or death from cardiovascular disease. I mean, it's a very considerable study involving lots of, all the studies that they could put together. And the same thing was true with cancer. So I think we may be beginning to see a real chink in this entire effort to try to sell nutrition in the form of pills.
May I just be a little bit of the devil's advocate in that I don't ask my patients to take A or C or E, because I totally agree with what Colin and John have said there, but when people are first starting out on this change, and it's extremely profound. I mean, for many patients, they don't have any idea really how to eat. The thing that they're most desperate about when they first start, they leave your house, they leave the office, they go out and they, my God, where do I start? But fortunately, we've given them a list of things that they can start with, but often that's not enough. And what I've seen happen to people is that they'll start and they'll get one vegetarian meal they like, beans and rice. And then the next day it'll be beans and rice. And the next day it might be beans and rice. Now, that's not really very creative, because the strength of the plant-based diet is in, I want people to every day get all the colors and get the grains and get the legumes and get all the different variety of vegetable, because that's the strength of this. And so I guess I'm a little bit fearful that something may be missed in that, just eating that one alone, so I will get a multivitamin. And of course the B12. I don't know that I've got data yet that they've been harmed by the common multivitamin, providing it doesn't have too much of vitamin A.
You know, I would like to agree with this. I think those of you who can't totally buy into the strong statement that Colin and I made, you're going to do yourself a little harm by buying a one-a-day multivitamin mineral supplement, which costs you less than $20 a year. What I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves of vitamin supplements and mineral supplements. They got to go.
Yeah, I'd just also like to comment that, you know, and I keep in mind that there are certain vitamin supplements are more toxic than others, because some vitamins are particularly more toxic than others. And that, for example, vitamin A is particularly toxic. Beta-carotene has been shown to have harmful effects. And I do recommend a multivitamin for most of my patients, because I want them, because I do recommend they have almost no salt in their diet. My practice is full of diabetic, hypertensives, cardiac congestive heart failure, kidney failure people. I get them off by putting them on a natural food diet with no added salt. I get them off their Lasix as well. I get the swelling to go away in their legs. It protects their brain, and the low salt diet And the vegan diet is very often low in vitamin D, especially in people not getting adequate sun. And I do blood levels on the vitamin D, so I give them a supplement to make sure their vitamin D is adequate. It gives them a little iodine and a little B12, but it does have no vitamin A or beta-carotene or the other fat-soluble substances they don't need in higher dosages. So I'm cautious about it, but I also want to make sure my patients have adequate levels, including having their homocysteine levels checked to make sure they're getting adequate B12 and adequate folate, not assuming that their level is adequate just because they're so-called eating healthfully.
Just one quick thing. It's kind of interesting. There's a new study published on stents. It just came out, and in fact, it's only published it's only been talked about in the medical heart meetings, where they put stents in people. There's this whole thing about homocysteine, and what they did is they put one group of patients that received stents on the concoction that's supposed to lower folic or lower homocysteine, folic acid, B6, B12, compared to another group that got placebo. Those who were on the supplement had greater artery closure than those who didn't get the supplement. When you sit down, the theory's great, but when you sit down and really apply the actual experience, the results sometimes are quite shocking and very disappointing to the millions of dollars that were put into these studies by industry to show the opposite of the results they actually got.
Well, I don't really buy that so much. I think homocysteine is a clear indicator of disease presence, and I've seen clinically in my practice that people with very high homocysteine levels have had clinically advanced hyperblood pressure and other signs of atherosclerosis in spite of being vegans for more than 30 years. And by restoring their homocysteine, I don't think B6, folate, and B12 always brings it down, but if you follow the homocysteine levels and give them what's necessary to bring it down, you see clinical improvements, including the high blood pressure coming back to normal as the homocysteine comes down. So I think there's some problems with some of those studies, and there's problems with the assumption that just taking B6, B12, and folate to a patient who already has adequate B12 levels, adequate folate levels, and adequate B6 level is what they need to lower their homocysteine. So I think sometimes the individual care has to be brought to bear on what the patient's needs are, and I do think significantly elevated homocysteine is a definite risk factor for disease that we should look at.
We're really, this is the kind of conversation you want to have. The risk factor is the problem that we've got to address. Is this whole medical business is directed at treating risk factors. We treat blood pressure, we treat cholesterol, we treat homocysteine, we treat blood sugar, we treat triglycerides, we don't treat patients. And when we give drugs to lower these risk factors, we end up with sick and dying patients with low risk factors. They don't get better. And that's been shown by multiple studies on all of those risk factors. The results are disappointing or a complete failure. And the reason is because you haven't corrected the underlying problem. People do not die of high homocysteine. They don't die of high cholesterol. They don't die of high blood pressure. They die of rotten arteries. And you need to get down to treating the basic problem, not the risk factors, not the signs of disease. That's why the difference between what might be expected and what you actually see, just like Dr. Fuhrman talked about a little while ago, fever. What happens if you're a doctor and you have a patient who comes in with pneumonia and a high fever and you decide the treatment will be aspirin? You have a dead patient with a normal body temperature instead of treating the pneumonia, which you should treat. It's the same thing with the artery disease and the cancer and the other health problems. Don't treat the risk factors with various pills. That's what medicine does. That's why medicine fails. Treat the underlying problem, and that's the wrong diet and the wrong lifestyle. Then the risk factors come down. Yeah, the homocysteine will come down, you put people on a good diet. Yes, the cholesterol will come down, and the blood pressure, and the weight, and all the things you're looking for, but you've done it in the right manner, correcting the problem. It's not profitable, but it's what's right.
I'd like to follow up on...
Let's let someone ask a question.
I just want to. I want to follow up on something because this is what's coming from these questions. Because what you're seeing, and this is a natural thing from an audience that is as sophisticated as you. But John's point it has to be emphasized, and that is the key thing that we're hearing is what I think Colin Campbell taught me this word. What we're seeing in these questions is a sort of what we think of as reductionist thinking. I've heard outside about CoQ10. Up here we're hearing of vitamins. We're hearing about all these other little items. What you have to remember is, remember the slide I had up there of where I learned about how to treat this disease? if not from McDougall, from the Papua Highlanders, from Central Africa, from the Tarahumara Indians. These people never heard about CoQ10. They never heard about, you talk about risk factors. Why does everybody have to why does the National Cholesterol Education Program want everybody to know all about, every American has to know about cholesterol, blood pressure, all these risk factors that we have to hear. Why do we have to hear about these risk factors? Because the recommendations of all our health societies are marching us to the edge of the cliff, right? And why are we marching to the edge of the cliff with these risk factors? Because we're eating the crappiest diet on earth. Why isn't it easier, instead of having us learn about risk factors, just to tell us what's the healthiest diet so we can walk along the edge of the cliff, not over the cliff?
I just have to comment one more time. It's true that we should all live a lifestyle to avoid risks, and that's what we're all here and about. However, it's not good. It's good information for the general public, because most people will keep their risk factor levels low, their homocysteine levels low, their cholesterol low. We'll keep ourselves in the best shape possible by living a healthy life. But I see, but over the last 13 years of my practice, I see a huge number of people that have been on vegan and vegetarian diets more than 10 years, some for more than 30 years. I've seen quite a numerous patients who've been on ideal vegan diets, the perfect diet with B12 supplementation. And I've seen quite a few that got into problems with strokes, high blood pressure, and even atherosclerosis due to heightened homocysteine, due to probably a genetic defect in homocysteine metabolism. They're not treated with a drug. They're treated with a nutritional supplement called a folate derivative, and in lowering their, I can give you an example of one patient. I won't mention his name. Some of the people might even know him. He's a physician, and he was on a strict vegan, natural hygiene type diet for 30 years. He came into my office with a blood pressure about 240 over 160, with a folate level above 20, and a B12 level that was plenty adequate, and he took regular B12. I had, after being placed on 3 separate medications and then treated with this form of folate to lower homocysteine, we got his homocysteine level to come down from a very high level to the normal level again, and his blood pressure gradually came back to normal from 220 over 150, him being almost in very bad conditions, and it normalized his blood pressure, and he was able to come off medications. This man is doing excellently well, and it hasn't been the first patient. I just happened to have had the opportunity to see the effects of heightened homocysteine, and the way that treating it with just B12, B6, and folate, and doesn't always bring it down. What I'm saying is you still have to treat the individual, and various individuals have various needs. It's also well known that some individuals have heightened vitamin D needs. Even with getting adequate sunshine or taking vitamin D, they still are deficient in vitamin D. They have something genetically that maybe is not, something in their body is different, and they have to be treated as an individual. So I'm just, you can't make a blanket statement, because every person could go home and think that, well, a heightened homocysteine, we should just let it go, or it's just going to take care of it in my diet. Just like people thought years ago that that we can get adequate B12 from a vegan diet, and if you just eat right, your B12 will go back to normal. That too, there's individual differences in our B12 needs, and those should be at least looked at as well.
I'd like to weigh in here with just one additional comment. I have followed this nutrient supplement question for quite a long time. In fact, I actually spent 3 years testifying for the Federal Trade Commission in Washington when this whole thing started in the beginning, and basically considerable risk to my whatever. In taking a stand against the use of nutrient supplements, and that we didn't really have the theoretical basis for using them that much. Aside from the B12 question, just observing this over the years, one of the concerns that I have that has been practiced by the industry as they advertise these supplements is the fact that we tend to end up using supplements, a lot of people do, using supplements as a sort of a crutch for good nutrition. And so it's very diversionary. The industry is actually advertising that way, almost to say this: don't bother changing your diet so much. I mean, this is what Atkins was all about. I mean, Atkins really made a lot of money, from everything I understand, because of the supplements he was selling. In other words, he's creating the condition that would require maybe supplement use. And so as far as these supplements are concerned, yes, we can see things in biology that look like they are a bit of a benefit in the short run, but it's really the long run. And in the long run, that's where the issue is. And in order to understand that, I just can't, as years have passed, I have seen just only become more awed by what really goes on inside of the cell. I mean, there's so many things going on inside. There's such a network of reactions. It's so beautiful if one stops and thinks about how biology really works. And you got zillions of things just working this way, that way, every other way, either to create good or harm, if you will, but if you're given the right food, it's going to create good. And for us to come along as individuals and make this assumption, this superficial assumption, that somehow we can take out of that large mixture of stuff, stick in one chemical here, and hope to achieve long-term benefits, it really doesn't make theoretical sense.
Okay, ready for a new question? It seems that you're presenting really a whole new paradigm for the practice of medicine. And what I'm wondering is, for existing healthcare professionals like physicians or nurse practitioners, if they wanted to implement these suggestions and try to work with patients with chronic illnesses, some of whom may be on multiple medications, to make these diet changes, what type of education do they need to do that, or what's available for helping them to know how to do that in a skillful way?
I get asked this a lot. What I suggest people do that are starting out their lives and would like to help, and I encourage you strongly to do it, it's the most rewarding thing in the world to help people, is just get a standard ticket. Whatever your particular orientation is, if you want to be a dietitian, if you want to be a nurse, you want to be a DO, you want to be an MD, just get some type of legitimate ticket so that you can go out there with a license and practice, and then practice the truth. And people will come to you. It's not a great way to get rich, as I'm sure all of us could spend an hour telling you. You make a ton of money selling pills, make a ton of money selling procedures. It's hard to make money talking to people, but the rewards are tremendous. Some of you may have to get under the auspices of another professional like an MD. You might find a cardiologist that you can work for if you decide to be a dietitian or a nurse or a physician's assistant. And there are like-minded people out there, many of them that understand this. This is not a vacuum that we're in right now. The world out there does know this to some extent. You just have to seek those people out, and the patients will find you, and I encourage you to do it.
And you can also make a ton of money selling the Atkins diet, the Zone diet, or the South Beach diet. So maybe you guys could create something called the Manhattan Beach diet.
It won't sell.
A big theme this weekend has been that through a vegan diet, we can prevent most cardiovascular disease and cancer. So my question is, what's the next tier of diseases that's going to kill most of us anyway? Because it seems like most of us aren't going to live much past 90, no matter what.
I'll answer that. There's some questionable, and I think it's legitimate information in the scientific literature, that as you move to a vegan diet and reduce your risk of atherosclerosis and coronary artery disease and cancer, you're more susceptible to hemorrhagic stroke if you're on a high salt diet. In other words, what I'm saying is this, is that the damaging effects from a high salt diet might be an increased risk for people on a vegan diet, because it's a minor type of stroke. Most strokes are embolic strokes, meaning they're clots, and those are caused by atherosclerotic plaque. But hemorrhagic strokes are when the fragile, more delicate vessels burst in the brain under years of pressure from high blood pressure. There's some data in the medical literature and the scientific literature suggest that as people eat more animal products and have more atherosclerosis, as their rate of heart disease increases, the buildup of plaque in the brain stabilizes the delicate vessels that might be subject to hemorrhagic stroke. And so that a person on a vegetarian, so it's important for all people to reduce salt intake, but it might be the case, and I think you should consider it, that people on a vegan diet, as they're lowering the risk of heart disease and breast cancer and colon cancer, have to be concerned about our risk of stroke, and therefore it's very important to watch our salt intake.
Joel, I know the literature you're talking about, and I just have to counter by, these are people who want to hear good news about their bad habits. They want to tell you that there's a downside to living good. It's just like people want to tell you if you don't drink wine, you'll get more heart disease. You know, it's the same type of thinking. I believe and this is where I start more of my discussions than ever before. I believe that our creation is correct. You know, however you believe, whatever your philosophy or theology is, you have to look around you and see what a wonderful world this is and how wonderfully people must fit in. So the question you need to be asking is, what is the diet that best allows people to live and function and look their best? Now, I think this conference has a very clear orientation that that diet is a vegetarian diet. And I certainly do believe that. I also believe that people can tolerate, you know, a few cigarettes, a little coffee, a little alcohol, a little meat, and they'll live. The human being's tough. I mean, I've tested the body. The body can live off 2 packs of cigarettes, a half a bottle of whiskey, and grease every day. Believe me, I've done it. But I'm tired of testing my limits of survival, and I know that's why all of you are here, because you want the answer to a very simple question. It's got to be there. Maybe we don't have it. But if you don't think we have it, then you ought to be out there looking someplace for it. There has to be a set of rules that people can live by to allow them to look, feel, and function their best. And I don't believe there's a downside. Just like there's no downside to clean air, clean water, there must be no downside to clean food. We just have to define that clean food. I'm very, very confident about what that is. I think some others of us are too, but I think there's also a little difference of opinion, which is really healthy.
A high sodium, 5,000 grams of sodium a day is not a natural diet. It's very unnatural. And we're talking about the natural diet for man is not based on salting everything we eat. So we're in perfect agreement that the proper diet for the human species to maximize their lifespan and enjoyment on the earth is a natural diet. But when is it natural to have everything we eat doused with salt?
The question, the question was, I think, what, you know, I don't know where the fellow is who asked it, but what are people going to die of if you're not dying of cancer and if you're not dying of cardiovascular disease?
Right.
Don't worry. You're still going to find something, because at the first National Conference on the Elimination of Coronary Disease, we had a wonderful fellow from Stanford, and his name escapes me now, Priestley, I think, but who did an awful lot of wonderful work on the on aging. And it's very interesting. I still remember the figure very clearly. If you look, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to rectangularize the curve of life, enabling people, as John and others have indicated, to live a healthy life until, and not have it crescendo down by a lot of disease, but hold off disease until really the end of life. In other words, you don't want to have your stroke when you're 75, live another 8 years in a wheelchair, and so forth. Priestley said that of 10,000 people who make it to 85, how many are going to get to be 100? Very easy answer to remember. 1. Now you might say, well, how come? You know, Bob Hope just got to be 100. The other fellow, who was the other actor who smoked all those cigars?
George Burns.
George Burns got to be 100. And yet, the reason we're seeing that is because now, compared to the 100 years ago, the whole base of the population that we start with is much greater. We've conquered infant mortality. So there are many more people trying to reach to be 100. And if he goes on to say, what do you call a natural death? Who knows what a natural death is? But let's take the example of the 82-year-old retired school teacher who's living retired in a beach in Miami, and every morning somebody sees her walking along the beach, and she's been doing that for 10, 12 years, and then suddenly she's looking a little wobbly, and then she doesn't come out for a few days, and then she has the flu and she dies of a respiratory infection. We had a fellow in Cleveland who was a very powerful manufacturing genius who got to be 103 years old. He went to Boston, slipped on the ice, broke his humerus. Had a pneumonia, died. So we do have a certain fixed number of years that we can be here, and I think the key is try to not saturate those years with a lot of unnecessary illness.
Hi, I'd like to go back to the alcohol and health question. I was frankly surprised that none of you mentioned anything about the links between breast cancer and alcohol. And in my reading of actually one of your books and then some medical literature is that it's dose dependent. So yeah, if you're having 4 or 5, and you all can talk about this much more, drinks of alcohol a day, your risk of breast cancer goes up, but also 1 drink a day, which a lot of doctors now are recommending moderate use of alcohol for for heart disease prevention. So I just wanted to talk about the breast cancer link, and yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Quite honestly, I believe that if you can drink sociably, there's no real serious negative effect to it. And if you eat a healthy diet, that drinking 1 or 2 drinks a day will be negligible as far as your risk of breast cancer. That's my assessment of what all the literature says on that. The problem is, and what I was trying to address, is that 9 of you can drink that way, but 1 of you can't. And that's the alcoholic. And that's why you shouldn't talk in terms of health and alcohol, because that one person says, look, Dr. Esselstyn, he said you could drink, and goes home and gets in an accident, kills somebody, or beats the wife and kids. There's a tremendous amount of damage done by that connection. But seriously, if any of you have alcohol as a part of your life, I see no particular problem except that one very important exception. So I wouldn't worry about it. Enjoy your 2 glasses of wine. Your breasts will be fine if you eat good.
I'll go ahead and disagree with the boss. I may not be here next year.
What do you say?
Here's what I say. We had, this ties into the previous question, and that is, well, if you get rid of cardiovascular disease and cancer, then what are you going to die of, et cetera, et cetera. This is exactly germane to this very question that we now just had. What you have is a genetic code, and that genetic code has an ideal set of circumstances or environment for each of those cells for which they can live and then reproduce. You're a Xerox copy of what you were a few months ago, and a few months ago you were a Xerox copy of the Xerox before that, and the Xerox of the Xerox before that. And that's why you know what happens when you Xerox a Xerox a Xerox a Xerox. It fades. That's exactly what's happening. Now, in principle, the human body is not designed with a particular weakness. Whereas the kidneys are, in principle, in the population, just as good genetically as the heart, and the heart is as good genetically as the lungs, and the brain is as good as genetically as the heart. There's no one organ system that is particularly susceptible in this species. However, you as an individual can easily have your heart not be as good as your lungs, or your kidneys not be as good as your heart. You see how this would work. On the population average, there's going to be no difference. But as an individual, there absolutely are individual differences. And if you use any kind of substance or imbalance in the diet or any kind of unnatural relationship between self and environment, you will find that it will be ultimately stressing one particular set of cells harder, like ultimately potentially an organ system. And as a result of that, if what John is saying is, a little bit of this or a little bit of that, statistically, epidemiologically, you're going to see almost no differences. That's fine and that's true, and I would agree. However, as an individual, that could be the thing that hits your particular genetic weakness. And that might be, in other words, a glass of wine a week might be the thing that particularly causes you to have a devastating disease that takes you out early. And that's why I would say that the target is to try to live as healthfully as possible. We will fall short. I fall short. But be smart about it and realize that there isn't anything short of perfection that's, quote, okay in principle, you see.
This is terrific, and I would love to keep it going until 9 o'clock tonight. However, people do have to go to the airport. At some point, the Marriott's going to come in here and grab me by the collar. So I think, what do you guys think up there on the panel? You're the main guys. Another 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
Could we all have a closing comment?
Absolutely. How about, I promised this woman when I took the mic from her that she could ask a question. Why don't we let this question and then everybody have a closing comment? Sorry, guys. I think we need to wrap it up here in a minute.
Thank you. My father will kill me if I don't ask this question. It's two-part. He's an 85-year-old man, excellent health, excellent diet, correct B6, B12, everything, has gastroesophageal reflux. Put him on medication, and his homocysteine went up. He doesn't want his homocysteine levels up. Do we treat the homocysteine? Do we treat the GERD? And if so, how do we treat the GERD without medication?
I haven't done this for a number of years, but if you have gastroesophageal reflux, that results in some burning and some discomfort because you've got hydrochloric acid bathing what we call a squamous lining of the esophagus that was never designed to be bathed with hydrochloric acid. And I think it would be very inappropriate to try to operate on all these patients. Therefore, the simplest thing is to keep the water from going upstream. The hydrochloric acid is a liquid, and most of that patients are upright during the day, but the real time when they literally burn their esophagus is in the evening. And when they're asleep, you're lying flat and it rolls up and it starts bathing the lower part of the esophagus. So when you start to talk to these patients, there are several things that they should do. One, they must elevate the head of the bed on 4 to 6 inch blocks, not pillows. Not pillows. So that when the elevated the bed, the head of the bed is elevated under 4 to 6 inch blocks, there is the laws of physics deny the possibility that hydrochloric acid is going to reflux up into the esophagus, and you should recline or go to bed at night at least 4 hours after the last meal, and that in other words, you should eat around 5:30 or 6 o'clock at night, and the meal should be a light evening meal. So you have it largely digested and gone, diminishing and you don't have to take a lot of drugs and medication if you handle it mechanically.
Is the homocysteine more important or the gastric reflux?
I thought the question was more about the homocysteine came from the medication you said. Correct. Then I said I would rather treat it this way rather than with medication.
He's already done that. It's not effective. So the bottom line is, does he take medicine or with the homocysteines up, or is there any other?
Are we now no longer treating the gastroesophageal reflux, and we're now treating the high homocysteine?
The homocysteine comes down when he comes off medicines. The question is there another way to treat the reflux disease, or does he take the medicine to protect the esophagus at the risk of the homocysteine going up?
Am I missing something here?
Maybe you could talk to him individually afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. This is not, it's more for individual consultation.
Why don't we start on this end, John, and just go down and everybody ending?
Well, I just want you to know, I learn something every time I come to one of these, from my colleagues and also from you. And I look forward to the next one next year. I think I've shared enough general comments with you, and I certainly hope that you will act as guiding lights, not only what you know, but in what you do. And go out and help everybody else, help your friends, help your relatives. You have to be strong though, because you know what the reaction is going to be. They're going to think you're from outer space. But if you can take the heat and you can go out and spread this message, the good news about good health, then you'll get the same kind of results that many of us here have on the panel and many of you also have. It's worthwhile. The planet needs our help. And thank you very much for coming and sharing your time with us.
The thought that I first think about in regards to this conference is not just the fact that we have such an excellent audience, and I'm very proud to be part of this very distinguished group of colleagues, but I've gotten kind of interested in the history of this, going all the way back to the days of the ancient Greeks who really seemed to be onto this. Socrates and Plato and Pythagoras and so forth and so on said some remarkable things about the value of eating this way and actually maintaining health. I mean, they had their philosophical reasons too, but they actually did, in fact, point out how health could be gained by this. And looking at the history, it's very interesting to see how the vegetarian sort of idea, it wasn't called vegetarianism at the time, sort of went in decline for hundreds of years and started to emerge again in the 1800s and has gradually struggled to sort of surface a little bit, but I mean, and given that point, it's been around, the idea's been around a long time. It's really been around a long time. And I think just in the last maybe, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years or so, the idea now is beginning to surface in a fairly robust way. The public really is now acknowledging the fact that vegetarianism is not necessarily a fad diet as it was thought 20, 30 years ago. You can go into a lot of restaurants and get yourself a vegetarian entree. And I think we're sitting on the cusp right now of something really important likely to happen. And I think with the kind of interest that obviously you're showing here in this subject, and also with the support that is given by people like Jeff and Sabrina Nelson with their website to sort of bring everybody into the fold, I think we're really in for some very exciting times in the future. I'm really looking forward to it. And so I'm very excited to be here, and I thank you very much for coming too.
Well, I just have a concern that I perhaps didn't have last year. I always have felt when we've come here that we're sort of singing and talking to the choir, and that you folks know all about how it is, and you're just here to reinforce what it is you're doing. But now I've increasingly been noticed in the questions that I've had and people have come up that I'm not aware that that everybody here is doing it the way that is right. And there may be a lot of folks who are occasionally not quite following the diet the way that we think is the safest for you. And simply hearing us give this every year does not do it for you. What you have got to do, I feel, is to simply, at least to protect yourself from cardiovascular disease, is to know what are your numbers. You saw what incredible detail has to go on when you reverse this heart disease and how you prevent it. Are all of you out there, are you comfortable? You've all got cholesterol under 100, your LDL is under 80. I mean, that's the message that I want to leave with you, is that I think that you, I want to see you around. And I want to know that you're healthy, but just don't say you're vegan and you're healthy. You got to go do more than that. You got to know what your numbers are and be sure that the way that you are living is reflected by a form of internal body chemistry that makes us feel secure and comfortable with how it's going. I know there's a number of you who have tried to buttonhole me, and I don't mean to. I wish I could clone myself. I will mention that I think that there are 4 other people I see. One from Massachusetts, 2 from Ohio, 1 from California. If Matt and Judy and Lori and Al would mind just standing up, because these guys are walking the walk and talking the talk, and they really know how to do it. They've got it down. So my message is that I want you guys to really to put it into practice. And I can't say enough to Sabrina and Jeff for having done some of these national conferences. There's some shoveling coal that goes on with this. I think you guys have done it terrifically. I'm proud and delighted to be here.
Well, I second that. At first I thought it was me talking. But no, I can't do ventriloquism that well. But anyway, I've been at some health conferences before, and I'm very excited about this one because I think it's really unusual that you have actually it was really great that you got a certain message. The message was consistent, some slight differences, but you didn't hear. I've been to conferences where there's 400 speakers, every person with a different message. The people just left confused, didn't know, their heads were spinning, didn't know what to do. You know what to do. You guys are blessed. You know how to take care of your lives, and now you can go home and really feel you got something out of this. It made sense. You put it together in a way that you can be more invigorated and motivated to go back to apply this in your lives. So I think it's really been a wonderful experience for all of us to have such a valuable experience together.
Well, I think I would say that as I look back over the last 20 years of being a vegetarian, that for me, I can tell that many of you are going through at different stages the different things that I've gone through, and that's that this is quite a journey. And you even see in literally the leading experts in the world up here on this table, excluding myself, because I'm not an expert in this, in the subtleties of the dietary issues or the medical issues, that even among them, the brothers will squabble a little bit. And that's healthy, because all of the information isn't in. But we do know the direction, and we have the compass pointed the right direction. And so as you get to see this and get your questions answered and get some of your uncertainties settled, it helps you formulate more resolve to move that direction. And all I can say is that I want to thank you for coming. I want you to leave with a good feeling that we have here together, and wish you luck on your journey, because this is the most difficult thing that you will ever do. Good luck to you.